welcome everybody. My name's Maya Allison. I'm the Executive Director at the Art Galleries at NYU Abu Dhabi and the Chief Curator as well. And I'm really honored and delighted to reunite tonight with Sam Bardaouil and Till Fellrath from the Art Reoriented, I think we refer to you, and Louma Salamé, the Director of the Boghossian Foundation and Villa Empain. I first met Louma several years ago when I went to the Villa Empain to see Ways of Seeing in its second iteration. And I was going in order to look at bringing it to NYU Abu Dhabi. And subsequently we did, and it opened in September of 2019. And we are launching tonight the archive of that exhibition. So photographs, publications online, and so on. And so tonight we'll take a little bit of a look at that, but kind of revisit some of the questions that the exhibition raised from the perspective of where we are now and how we see now, which does change, as it turns out, over time, not only over place. So welcome, Sam, Till, and Louma. I'm glad to have you. And so I'd love to start just by sort of checking in and seeing where you are in the world right now, and just a little snippet of what you might be working on or doing in this interesting moment we're in. Sam and Till, would you like to start?
Yeah, well, we've been riding it out, as one says, from Munich here in Germany. Okay. And, you know, like many people, we found ourselves with ample time. So we could finally get down to doing so many things that we've been wanting to do, whether it's those stacks of readings that have been piling up, or, you know, kind of communicating with some artists and some fellow colleagues over several issues that we've been wanting to discuss. It's been a good time, in a sense, to reflect and think, change of pace, but also to realize that the responsibility that comes with what we do has to somehow be reflected on and perhaps adapted to fit the next phase that we're all entering into, perhaps a little bit blindly, but also with as much insight as we can muster given the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really a fascinating time because, you know, so much of our work as curators these days is based on international travel. And it is certainly based also on meeting people face to face and having these conversations with artists. And so this complete change in pace also puts a lot of things at question of how we encounter art at large. How do we go about curating an exhibition? How do we conduct our research? And I'm personally convinced that if anything, it actually emphasizes how important it is to actually see art live and in person. I do not believe that you can actually see art online and experience it online. That is actually one of the biggest challenges that I think we will face, and we will have to see what that means for the coming years. You know, so we're lucky that we have been traveling a lot. We've been seeing a lot over the last years. But yeah, and I think that's really one of the you know, the serious questions and things that I think we'll have to find an answer to in the coming months and years, because the situation clearly is one that is here to stay in one way or shape or form, and we'll have to see what that means for rethinking a lot of things. So
I couldn't agree more. I'm with you on many of those points, and I would love to come back and get into that, actually, especially as curators thinking about how to activate what we do with these new limitations. And Louma, I understand your the Villa Empain is open now, which is nice, so people actually can see art in person. When did it reopen?
So we had to close for 3 months, and it was very hard for all of us here at the Villa in Brussels. And now we've been able to open our doors to the visitors 3 weeks ago. And we're very happy to be able to host our visitors who came. They were also very excited to come back. So all the visitors come and they tell us how happy they are to be back at the Villa Empain. And so we had to postpone the current show with 3 months as extra. And the current show is really about what's happening right now, because it's called Mappa Mundi, and it's about the map of the world. And it's 30 contemporary artists coming from all around the world. You have Birmani, Chinese, Congolese, Palestinian, Lebanese artists, Belgium, obviously. And they're all proposing they're all proposing artworks about the map of the world, the north and the south, the east and the west. And the curator is Alfred Pacman, the former director of Centre Pompidou in Paris.
And for those who are not familiar with your organization, I think it may be a good place to step off into this larger conversation is to talk a little bit about your mission as it relates to the map of the world, actually. I think that's really perfect that you have that exhibition on now as we're going into ways of seeing as they relate to where we are, like both virtually and geographically.
Yeah, when we met, we realized that we had in common together to work on fostering the dialogue between the East and the West. And we work on a daily basis at the Villa Empain, which is an iconic house from the 30s. It's a very specific place. It has a swimming pool from the 30s, the gardens. It's very unique, very beautiful. And in this amazing place, we do exhibition, we do concert, we do dance, performance, we have an artist residency. And to give you an example, we had, for instance, a Lebanese writer working in the residency, and at the same time, we had an Israeli conceptual artist working next to him. We had a concert bringing Armenian and Turkish communities together. So art is a universal language, and it brings us all together. I mean, this seems very simple, but actually it is. We work on it every day. We have like example of it, emotions, and so it actually works.
I actually think that it was really exciting for me to discover what your organization was doing, and I you know, we have to thank Sam and Till for bringing this to my awareness through your exhibition, which I'm now going to look at. And what I'll do is I'm going to share my screen, and we'll look first at the website of our exhibition, and then we'll look at how that compares to how it was done at Villa Empain. And the reason this is especially meaningful to me is that I do experience how the curatorial act, the act of deciding what objects go where and how they talk to each other and how they relate to the audience where you are, really changes depending on your audience and how you understand the mission in relationship to your audience. And it was really remarkable to watch how Sam and Till together, shall we say, reoriented the exhibition. And so I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and we'll look a little bit at how that worked out. Give it a second here. Okay. Okay, so everyone can see that. So here we are on what is now the archive page for the exhibition, and you see here an installation view of a piece that was the first thing you would encounter when you walked into the gallery at NYU Abu Dhabi. This is the Gustav Metzger piece, To Crawl Into. And as you can see, people crawl underneath this yellow fabric to discover an extremely large photograph from a critical moment in history. But you can never see the whole photograph at the same time by virtue of this literally altered way of seeing in the sense of the physical encounter of the installation. And here is what it looks like at the villa. So as you can see, it's actually quite a bit, it's the same work, but the environment is so dramatically different because of the physical space. And so it sort of it read in a way very differently, somehow less shocking for some reason. I'm not totally sure why. Look at a few of these pictures. This is the Fred Sandbach installed also downstairs. And do you want to, the Fred Sandbach is interesting because I understand that this floor was created, well, I shouldn't give away the secrets. I won't give away the secrets. Okay, keep going. There's the formal view of that same piece. This also gives you a chance to see this wonderful place that Louma organizes, and another view of that Sandbach and some other images. And to come back to our site, you will see that we have the installation views, but I'm going to take us through the opening event images just because it's always fun to see pictures of people and actually seeing the art. And this is this wonderful moment for us where we had a Cindy Sherman sort of Orientalist photograph opposite what we'll see later as an Orientalist painting and a Mona Hatoum necklace. And there's a mix of different items in here that are similar to what was in Brussels, but actually sort of recombined to create new conversations. And then, so just to also let you know that our version of the book, now you can see online the first, the introduction and the first essay, which is by the curators. So we hope that this will also have people continuing to ask about ways of seeing as it was framed by this exhibition as a question. And I'm going to I'm going to go back now to the group and talk a little bit about the idea behind this and how it was shifted, and then we can revisit the images. Okay, I'm back. Okay, Sam and Till, take it away. How did you think of this exhibition? Louma, how did you think about adapting it, or what was the interaction that led to how it was adapted? Because it opened in Istanbul, and then Brussels was the second stop.
Should we start, perhaps?
Please.
Okay. So basically, I think one of the very important questions that we always ask ourselves whenever we're working on any type of exhibition from the very get-go is, what will this exhibition bring in terms of new ideas or certain questions? What kind of questions it will raise? What kind of conversations it will initiate within that specific context where it will be seen? So for us, it's very important to understand the institution, to understand the public that is coming to that space, and try to kind of always adapt and tweak our curatorial ideas and vision for a specific show, regardless what the theme is, so that it becomes more of an engaging dialogue with a very real entity, a very real space. There's a very big difference between thinking theoretically about great ideas and concepts, but then applying them into, or translating them into a spatial experience within a very specific geographical, cultural, political context. So perhaps I'll speak a little bit about Arter very briefly, and then Till can take it from there. So when we first conceived the show for Arter, it was a very, very specific moment and very charged moment, right after the Gezi demonstrations. It was very, very heated. The discourse was very strained, and it was very tempting perhaps to come in and try to do something very politically outright, to try and bring art that is engaged to kind of like tell people how to act and what they should do. But we opted for something more subtle. We thought it was important to use ways of seeing and Berger's thoughts about the act of looking as a means of advocating the necessity of different points of view coexisting and talking to each other instead of at each other. So this was kind of the political kind of line underscoring the entire exhibition, and kind of led to the choice of a lot of works that made it to the other iterations, but also were specifically conceived and selected for the show at Arter.
I think what's really also at the core of this show, and it's a little bit the core of Berger's theories and writings, is to, in a sense, empower the layperson. So if you are the viewer and the visitor to an exhibition, this was our take on that. I don't think you should have to rely on a prior degree in art history or a PhD in art history to understand what is actually going on in the space. So saying it clearly, I think every visitor has the right to somehow find a direct access into a show, to directly make connections with specific artworks. Much the same when you go and listen to a concert, for example. I think in music, we don't have that problem. People go and listen to something, and you don't try to intellectualize it first and then try to understand and listen to the music, and it enchants you, or you like it, you don't like it, and you feel something in it. But in art, for some reason, we've come to a point where we sort of put this barrier between the exhibition and the artworks and the viewers. And our approach with every show, but this one in particular, is really to actually give people the power. You can go in there and discover things about these artworks, and perhaps even in this case, a bit of a treasure hunt. The idea was to always see, like, so how can I look at this artwork again? What other reality emerges when I take that second look, when I look at it up close, or when I, try to discover the formal aspects. So what is that double take, in a sense, that each of these pieces has? And I think that is really a core message that this show, but I think our practice has at large. And in that sense, it is only a direct consequence to adapt each show a little bit to the local audience. You know, you need to give the audience some clues or something where they feel, whatever that means, you know, whoever comes, that somehow there is something they feel perhaps a bit more closer to than somewhere else. So the show should never be exactly the same wherever it is.
I would say that that's actually a sort of a radical thing to say, don't you think? To say that an exhibition's curatorial premise should change and adapt to where it goes. That somehow, I think we often see shows that tour and it's the same show everywhere, right? Because it's this idea of the coherence of the curatorial premise. But this sort of what I think was so appealing to me in this exhibition is this idea that the premise responds to the viewer in a sense, in a way that I think kind of speaks to the larger points that you're making. So
Very much.
Louma.
Yeah, no, I would say, I often say, do not underestimate the power of art. So I always believe that culture can never be reduced to an artistic process alone, and it always carries many, many other dimensions. And that would be the first point. The second point is that with the Sam and Till, we were very lucky for different reasons. The first one is that 4 years ago, they had already curated a remarkable exhibition about Korean artists at the Villa Empain. So they knew every corner of the villa. They knew every little broken stairs. There are no broken stairs, but they really knew by heart the space, which was, I think, made it easier for them to be able to imagine a new version of the exhibition at the villa. And they had also the pleasure to work with the Villa's team. So there was also a trust between us. We knew that we would somehow find the solutions to adapt to our visitors, to make sure that it's relevant, because I think it's really nice. It's like a diplomatic reflection, to be able not to copy paste the project everywhere, but to make sure where are we actually, to ask this question, where are we? Many curators don't ask this question when they come to a place. They just work without this idea of where we are. And I feel it's very important, whether you're in Dubai or whether you're in Congo, whether you're in Brussels. Because so that was very helpful for us, and we together with Sam and Till, we discussed and they chose to add a numerous archive related to Belgian history inside the show, which made no sense in Dubai and would make no sense in Istanbul, but here for our visitor it was it had a huge impact.
And do you want to look at, should we look at some of those images now of what was there?
Yes, with pleasure.
Okay, let me get ready here. I'm slowly getting the hang of this. Share screen.
So, but maybe to discuss about these images. So I recall that Sam and Till added, for instance, a painting of the Belgium Revolution, also paintings of albums from Tintin in Congo, and we created a huge wallpaper because and it was very, very nice with yes, you can see the picture with basically traces of the past, of the Belgian past, of the colony.
Is this the wallpaper here? This one?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was from a print from the 20s.
It was from the colonial exhibition of 1910. So it was in the tradition of all these expositions universelles, the world fairs, and a way of ordering our, perception of other parts of the world. So you kind of collect locals, you collect people and you collect artifacts and you display them according to very, very politicized mechanisms of display in order to support your vision of the world and justify your political and expansionist political strategies. So this was obviously very relevant to the history of colonialism in the Congo vis-a-vis Belgium. And in the vitrine right next to the wallpaper, we displayed, as Louma was saying, original issues of the comic series Tintin et Milou. And it shows Tintin, the Belgian blonde white male, telling the Congolese that the Congo is part of the Belgian empire, in a sense, or the Belgian kingdom. And then there's a later version, which you're looking at now, that shows you the same picture, but instead of him telling them that Congo is part of Belgium, what you see on the blackboard in the cartoon is a math lesson. But it's still the white male telling, you know, the African subjects, you know, very, very problematic, obviously politically, and very contested, what they should do and how they should think. So again, these are images that prescribe to the viewer and have prescribed historically a certain dynamic of power, a certain relationship between, you know, a colonizer and a colonized. And we thought it was important to bring these objects that are part of popular culture, in a sense, and use them to kind of question the agency of the image and how it relates to critiquing these very contested histories.
It is also, you know, when it comes to seeing, in a sense, what the exhibition is also trying to do, it's not so much just only looking at artworks and different perspectives, but it is also, in a sense, an attempt to empower every individual to be more critical and understand that what you see is not necessarily always the full truth. You know, what you think you see, what you're being taught perhaps, may not really be all that there is to the story. And in this case, it applied also to how people, you know, not so long ago, 100 years ago, were looking at colonial possession by the king. How is that displayed? How were people invited to look at it? But even nowadays, you know, has that changed? Or how do we now look at that history? And how do we now look at these places? So it goes much beyond the exhibition. And in that sense, it really is also an attempt here. You see these unbelievable pictures, really, of the display. This is a great one, Maya, here, of these exhibitions and of how culture was presented. And you see real Congolese inhabiting those spaces. You know, I mean, it's really unthinkable to do that today. But I think it's very important to question and see how much has this thinking behind this intention really changed. You know, only because we may not do that, do we really feel fundamentally different about a place like Congo, or do we not? And what's our relationship to that? And how do we see these cultures? So this element of criticality, without didactically saying, you know, this is how it is, or there is a truth, or we have to be against this and against that. Our attempt goes much more to the individual and empower people and kind of make a case for them to look critically with a critical eye and look again and see carefully before they have any kind of judgment.
Well, I was really struck too, because so much of this exhibition is sort of, there's a lot of cutting edge contemporary sort of experimentation with how ideas and concepts are presented. And then you encounter this, and there's this shock of sort of recognizing history and embedded layers of, you know, the act of looking also being the act of, it can be linked to the act of destruction and dehumanization, and which is very interesting because today they're taking down the statue in front of the Museum of Natural History in New York, which is related to this narrative. It's kind of interesting timing to be having this conversation. Louma, did you have something you were going to say?
To say exactly what you were saying, that right now in Belgium, some people are also dismantling the statues of Leopold II. So it was 4 years ago, but we were ahead of our time, because it's really like something that is on the news right now also in Belgium. And also I recall a sentence from the Berger book saying, "Seeing comes before words, the child looks and recognizes before he can speak." And that's also something that we should say, that, yeah, so that's what Till was mentioning it, so the seeing comes before everything. And then
Thank you for bringing that up. Actually, I think the tie back into the actual original text is really important. And this was also this type of looking was a central part of his thesis as well, of course. Yeah, thank you. Okay, now, do we want to talk about this other painting, or shall we move on?
We can move on to perhaps talk about other types of critiques or ways of seeing.
How was the audience reacting in Dubai? I was just, because here in Brussels it was a very successful show. Both the press and the visitor were really like enlightened by this tricky exhibition that questions the visitor, that raised lots of interesting questions about works, history, rewriting history.
I think that it was for us, I'm going to share my screen again now to show you a piece in particular that I think could sort of start off this part of the conversation, because one of the things that we struggle with, I think many institutions do, but in particular as a university gallery, there's a perception that there is even more of an intimidation factor for the audience, right? That you walk in and this is where the professors go to teach their classes, and it's scholarly, and you know, all these things that can make people feel very uninvited, right? And so we've worked really hard to break that down. And one of the best moments I think for us was when Sam and Till were working with the student docents to sort of talk about the tour, and pointed out there was no wall text with the labels, just the name of the work, and that if you want to know more about it, you can read the book, but your interpretation is the first one. And I think that was a really a message that we asked all of these docents to send out into our audiences, and people got really, I watched, you know, jaded senior members of our of international communities coming in who would normally not respond positively to some of the more experimental art, and having an incredibly beautiful moment where they would turn and realize that they could think whatever they wanted. And it was just amazing to watch. I was just like, this is why I do what I do. It was really fantastic. I just remember this one person going like, ah, you know, and by the end of it, she just was completely converted. It was really wonderful. So I'm going to share the screen of this one moment in the beginning when you first enter the exhibition on the right. And you can, I think that I don't know how much you can see, but this is a painting, looks like a historical painting, and the woman has some kind of apparatus coming out of her face. You can see that?
No, we can't see your screen yet.
You can't. Oh, sorry. I'll have to actually share it. Okay, now can you see it? Yeah? Thank you. And this was a great one for a sort of a warm-up conversation for students, as we give a lot of tours to classes as part of their syllabus, and to ask them what this painting is. And I would love to hear Sam and Till tell us about this painting in particular.
Take it. So you know, what you're seeing at this painting, and I am pointing at it also, so maybe it's only I'm actually talking about it while I'm making that really strange body posture thing, whatever. But I'm pointing right at the center of that piece. So I am, you know, this is a painting from the Biedermeier period, and it is a piece in the end by a contemporary Austrian artist called Markus Schienwald, and he gives us this painting, but something really strange emerges in this painting. Now, it's maybe hard to see it online on the screen, but when you look very carefully, you can see a portrait of a woman, as you might see it in many, many like historical museums. It looks like just a regular kind of portrait. Well, when you see and look at her face and her mouth in particular, you see there is a certain strange pin that runs right across her mouth. And the question that emerges is, what is that, it's okay, Sam, what is that instrument and they're doing? And you start to question, is it maybe a medical instrument, that you have something wrong with their teeth, and you're just trying to make sense of what that actually is. And then at one point, maybe you start realizing, maybe this can't be true, you know, this is really maybe just a fake thing. And in fact, really the artist actually added that to the historical painting. Now, what is really genius about this act, in my opinion, is that on the one hand, it changes or challenges your perception of what such a portrait should look like or would look like. But it also challenges your perception of the time when an artwork was created. You know, can we still say, is it actually a contemporary artwork, or is it still an artwork, a painting that is a few hundred years old? When was it created? And actually, who created it? Who is the painter? Is it the painter of the original painting, or is it Markus Schienwald because he added it in this? And I quite like this painting in the context of the show because it blurs a lot of those boundaries. And to what you're saying before, Maya, I think you see many times people in museums and they end up reading the label for 2 minutes and then they look at the artwork for 30 seconds. And then they go to the next one. So who's that artist? But you don't actually spend time looking at the artworks. And this is actually quite grotesque, I think, in many ways. You know, when you go to a museum, I think you should go to see the artworks and let them talk to you, let them speak. When you see a painting, you can discover so many layers and so many stories in them. But the fact of when it was painted or who it did, and do sort of a checklist, oh, I know this famous artist, I think it's actually more important to maybe look at that painting first and then see actually who did it and understand what was the intention by the artist in this case, or who is it in the artist. So these questions I think are a lot more fun. And even for a visitor in a museum, I think it's a lot more rewarding if you do it that way and don't start by doing boring text. I can read a book. I don't need to go to a museum for that.
Louma, did you have any? This was a really good one for our students because they almost came to blows over it. Some were so upset that the historical painting was altered, and then others felt like this was unbelievably interesting and obviously had never come across Duchamp, but that's another story. And so this is, you know, a gateway. It's a gateway drug for art. But Louma, how was it in your space? Did you? I think that I would imagine that in Europe this would be read a little differently than here.
Well, I don't recall any people very angry at us about this painting, but I wanted to say that we're on the same page about the idea that a museum, whether it's in a university, whether it's wherever in the world, has always still a daunting image that could be like a boring cemetery of artifacts. And now I think the landscape has changed. Every day there is a new institution. Here in Belgium, the past 10 years, there have been 10 new museums. I think of Beirut, it's also a very, very emergent scene. Dubai, Saadiyat Island. I mean, we have, I think the past 20 years have been a revolution for museum institution. We engage so much more. We organize things for everyone, kids, adults, families. So I think this new way of doing things is also creating a new way of seeing things. And I mean, this competition, we can call it this way, has been very good for all institutions, because all the people working in the institution are now obliged to make sure they're actually talking to their visitors. We cannot just do things for ourselves and our colleagues, and we're not here only to get credit from our intellectual friends. We're here to talk to everyone, and in that sense, I think the exhibition was very generous. And what you mentioned about these people and being very happy about them not being obliged to think or do something about an artwork, I think that's also part of what we're all doing right now, is to help the visitor have his own experience with the work. We can give them information, and but just like Tim said, it's not about reading a book, it's really about engaging with the visitors. We had an amazing, we created one of the most beautiful booklet for the kids we ever did for this show. It was really popular. So all fluorescent. And
I spent a lot of time coloring it. It's really nice.
So yeah, I think that's a good thing about nowadays museum, is that we really engage on a social level, on a local level, on a regional level. We do international projects. So we always have this in situ questions and solutions to make, but we're also all on the same page that we're not lecturing our visitor. We're basically hosting them and hugging them. Without the COVID, but I mean, welcoming them and making sure they have a real experience. It's not, no more lectures.
Yeah, well, and to the point of COVID, I think I want to get to the question of how we see has changed. But I promised you a picture of this, what we call the Orientalist Corner in the show. This will be the last screen share that I do, which is here. Okay, so we're in a corner of the gallery. We're on the left-hand side. I have to move it so you can see. There's a painting, a sort of a it's from the 1800s. Very classic woman with a vase and some sort of unidentifiable Oriental landscape, shall we say. And then just across from it, opposite, looking back at it, in fact, is Cindy Sherman in a much more distinct moment. And then the hair necklace by Mona Hatoum on this corner. I really enjoyed this as a teaching moment also for students who are starting to understand about looking and when the art looks back and your physical relationship to the art. And this actually might be a nice segue into the question of remote viewing of art and the virus effect on our process. But these three objects looking at each other together, and not the candy bars, together created an incredible sequence of ideas of physicality and vision and objecthood and subjecthood. And I'm curious, did this play out also in Brussels, or was there a different focus? Did you see this show up there as well, or was this more specific to the UAE?
No, we had very different, I have to say, so the 18th century, I think, if I'm right, belongs to the foundation.
Yeah, it was known from...
We didn't have the Cindy Sherman painting, if I recall. But the chocolate bar was very successful. My son kept on going and going with his friends. And this is a perfect example of what we do in museum. We say, no, don't touch. And then, can we touch? It's actually chocolate. Maybe we can. So it's also like somehow a very good illustration of how to deal with visitors. Are we or not allowed to touch, to interact with the artworks? But I see the Dubai version is really also relevant. The dialogue between the artworks is really powerful.
I mean, I think perhaps to just chime in a little bit on this point, it's also a good illustration sometimes of how the logistics of what work can be shipped or loaned, you know, condition reports, budgets, impact what ends up in an exhibition or not. So, you know, perhaps in one venue we couldn't have a Cindy Sherman because the lender was not amenable to extending the loan, so we had to find another work, but we didn't have time enough to kind of have it at the second iteration, so it appeared in the third iteration. But the idea really was there throughout the entire sequence of the exhibition, and it is basically looking at this, departing from the notion of the Orientalist gaze. How a certain image of a particular place, of a particular people, illustrated by the, you know, the objectification of a woman in this case, becomes totally kind of glued in the collective imagination and perception, you know, of a society, of a certain place. And Orientalism is a great example of these kind of concocted, totally kind of constructed images of the Arab world in particular, but there are different forms of Orientalism. So the idea in Abu Dhabi kind of, I think, matured perhaps even more so because we had already staged it in 2 different iterations, and we got also very lucky with loans. And the dialogue was truly about the Orientalist gaze of, you know, towards women on one hand, but also the insecurities that women have been, in a sense, perhaps prone to because of the male gaze in different shapes and forms. And this is what you see in Cindy Sherman, the fragility, that this facade of power that she's trying to portray and hiding her aging kind of through the, you know, what she's wearing and the accessories that she has. And then bang, you know, comes in Mona Hatoum with this necklace that is made of her own hair. Something that is perhaps, you know, very, very, you know, almost dirty. You know, you wouldn't think twice about hair in a bathtub or on the floor, but she took these hairs, but she collected every time she actually showered over a long period of time and made this necklace that is supposed to signify beauty and ornamentation and richness. to kind of take it into the core kind of, you know, heart of what the matter is all about. It's the female body that should be celebrated, and anything that comes from there without any fringes attached. So again, taking back the agency into the hand of the woman. And I feel like I'm speaking on behalf of women while I'm not a woman, so perhaps I should not talk any longer. But the idea again connects to Berger, because one of his main you know, kind of theories was to revisit the history of art through a feminist lens, talking about women in art history, not just as nudes in male paintings, but actually as contributors to various episodes in this very, very long kind of story. So all these things kind of come together in so many different ways.
Well, there was this other aspect to it that I only, you know, when I give tours of exhibitions over and over, new stories emerge and new connections emerge, as I'm sure has happened to you. On the right-hand side, in that same quadrant, is the video, of course, of Paul and Marlene Kos, and she's looking at the camera and looking away, and looking at the camera and looking away, having a voice and missing the, you know, like this tension, and the whole thing starts to resonate. I mean, I definitely had my, you know, these sort of like mind-blowing moments as I was giving tours to young people who'd never thought about the female gaze, the male gaze, you know, that these were still new concepts. And this was one of the best sort of rehearsals of those ideas that I've ever seen in a show in one place. So thank you for helping us teach our classes. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. And I want to now ask, and I want to start, Louma, with you, if you don't mind, to ask, just while you guys were closed, did you think about doing online tours and online activities? And, you know, obviously I'm doing this. Because I want to see my people, you know, I want to connect and also connect with our audiences. But to Sam and Till's point, I find it very hard to feel the art in the same way through the internet. So what has your approach to this been?
It's a very hard question. I have to say that personally, I struggle with technology. So starting from my point of view, I'm not someone who enjoys anything that has to do with the computer. So in the beginning of the COVID, I started doing virtual tours of places I knew, for instance, in New York, knowing I couldn't go to New York until a long time. And I didn't enjoy it. So I asked our head of communication to build up a strategy for 3 months where she would always keep the contact with the visitor via Instagram, Facebook, the newsletter, all kinds of ways, talking about our current exhibition, talking about the catalogs, many things that we do, but basically I said no to the virtual tour of the exhibitions for several reasons. I don't enjoy it myself. The second one is that we just had opened the exhibition just before we closed. So I felt it was like giving away the whole work that had been done for a year for free. And also, this is a private foundation, and basically we're supported by the visitors coming. So for me, it was very important to make sure that they would come back to see the actual exhibition. And I truly believe that there is nothing like the experience of seeing an artwork in reality. And that was my inner belief. And everybody asked me, do you think they're gonna come? And I said, for sure, visitors will come back, and they will come back, and there will be a line. And that's what happened. And why I was convinced, why was I convinced? Because we offer something so unique. I mean, we had to cook, we cooked, we didn't go to the restaurant, but this is something you can never reproduce. This is something once in a lifetime. You go to see a Van Eyck painting, or you go to see Léonard de Vinci at the Louvre. There's nothing like a postcard, there's nothing like a book. So it's something that is really like magical, that is really specific, And I think this is like the biggest value of a museum is this specific moment, this dialogue you have with an artwork. And but nevertheless, we cannot stop the communication with the public. So it was very important to have regular announcements, lots of things to say, lots of things to show, information to give, but not the actual virtual tour.
Okay, Sam and Till, how does where we are now change how you see or think about seeing art and curating?
I would actually completely agree with Louma and everything that she said. And I think we were somewhat in a similar situation here in Munich. We had opened a space, an exhibition in a space called Bunker. And it is actually in one of those air raid bunkers that were constructed during the Second World War to shield the population from bomb raids by the Allied forces. And so it is an exhibition that is very closely tied to the nature of that space and to the problematic history of when the space was actually erected. And the show opened, and literally after 2 days, after the first 2 days of opening, it had to be closed down. So it's been closed ever since. And we were also discussing a little bit with the team on what we should do. And we opted for something quite similar what Louma was saying. We did not actually disseminate go ahead and do, virtual tours or do social media clips and postings, especially since in the beginning of the crisis, there was almost an over bombardment of such things. So there was almost an overreaction and a quick reaction that, you almost got like 50 links a day to look at this and that and So that we thought, okay, let's just rate it out. It's also a private foundation, privately supported and supported by the visitors. And I think it would be we thought it would be better to actually wait and see. Maybe in a few months we'll open it again, and this is not going to happen in September. That's what our plan is, and we restart it again as if it's kind of new, So we're going to try to pick up on the great press that we got and the great visitor response that we got, and then a few weeks prior maybe start social media posts about it. Now, I think it's also very important what Louma said is that you maybe need to not look at it as an either or. Some institutions were doing such things prior to the Corona crisis, because the truth of the matter is that not everybody has the means to travel around the world and see shows all over the place. And when you find something very interesting, I think you also have an obligation as an institution to think of ways how you can share that content and give people access to what it is that you're trying to do. So if it is a tour, it will never replicate the experience of being physical in the space and having that spatial relationship of seeing a painting. When I see the dimensions online, of course I can sort of, understand, but when I'm in front of that painting, I understand what that means, the scale of a painting. How do I look at it? How do I stand in front of, in the relation to it? However, I think most people will probably not see your show because it is only for a local audience, and there are many more people that visit maybe the website of a space and do research, or what you're trying to do now with the archive, I think is a very great approach, because it's a short amount of time, not only that the exhibition is open, but also geographically, the people that have access to that exhibition is quite limited. So on the one hand, you have the catalog, but I think on the one hand, maybe this crisis, the situation also prompts institutions to think of intelligent ways to expand user experience and expand the mediation of what it is that you're trying to do and experiment in very different ways. So it will not replace it, but I think it will probably prompt institutions to add things that are extremely important and valuable to the experience as a whole, because in the end, these institutions, all the institutions, are about engagement with viewers and about education.
And just to kind of perhaps take it back to Berger when it comes to this question of how do we see vis-a-vis these kind of virtual tools and viewing art online. Actually, Berger does talk about this in Ways of Seeing as well, which is very ironic because we're now having the same conversation that he kind of also instigated in that book or that series on the BBC. So he builds on Walter Benjamin's, Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, where he talks about the aura of the artwork, which is exactly what we're saying now. The artwork is now disseminated in so many different ways. It's not the same artwork anymore when you see it on your phone and on your laptop and on the screen. But then Berger took it to a very interesting place because he said, he was talking about how there's a chance of bringing in different media besides the artwork itself or the components of the artwork itself, and creating a completely different experience of how you receive and absorb the work. So when you can use the camera to scan the surface of a painting and see the minute details, when a certain clip of music plays in the background and creates a certain emotional layer which doesn't exist when you're walking and listening to other people talk in the gallery as you're walking. I mean, he wasn't saying that this is good or bad, just to say, to use simple terms, but that it's definitely a different experience. And perhaps this is the question today. There's no doubt that, you know, contemporary new technology and virtual technologies have a place and have a role to play in disseminating and expanding visitors' experience. But how can we use it in a creative way? And perhaps will it become an art form in and by itself to kind of allow us to experience the artwork in a way that's not possible, even when you are seeing it in reality? So I think to say that one is good and one is bad, you know, like categorically speaking, is perhaps a bit naive. And there are things that can be taken from both media, from both means of seeing, to kind of like create a more holistic experience.
Well, it's interesting though. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute there, because I agree. And, you know, I like to be able to zoom into the painting and see all the details in a way that I would never be able to in person. But the moment that you described, of where you see the work and you have a response to it that cannot be articulated, and I think this is where the sense, and I'm reluctant to give a kind of primacy to that experience of this immediate contact, because just for that point, we can't travel all over the world and see these works right now. We can't see any of them actually until our neighbors at the Louvre Abu Dhabi are going to open very soon, which is great.
That's right. I think it's an important point. If you mind just adding, because not everybody has the means also to travel. I think we need to be conscious of that as well, you know. So, and the second point that you raised is also the technology may well be an enabler to understand something about a work that you otherwise might not understand, you know. So whether it is maybe zooming in on a very small detail of something, or whether it is in fact maybe a curator giving a talk of an exhibition inside the spaces, and it is maybe filmed, because not everybody's going to be able to time it at a particular time, you know. So not everybody has that privilege to happen to be in the museum at a particular time to have a guided tour, but maybe wants that kind of thing. So it can also be an additional offer for someone to go deeper or to access a project in a different way. I think it's really just, they're all very different things. But they all start in the end, of course, with a physical manifestation of an exhibition. That I feel very strongly about. I don't think you can start with an online show without the physical presence of the works ever. Then it's probably more like a publication or a book, but it won't be an exhibition, in my opinion.
You have to wait. You should be careful with that.
Oh dear.
I mean,
I love talking to my peers. Like, it's these kinds of arguments are way too fun. But for artwork that's made to originate digitally, that would be a different conversation. We'll have to ask Bitform's Gallery. We'll talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I want to move over to the questions from the audience. If we have a few more minutes, we're a little low on time. Is there anything else? Any other closing remarks before we go to questions from Louma?
No, just to be precise, is that I think that we could create, just like Sam said, some new narratives about the artworks, but basically it's recreation. What we did during those 3 months were like close up, but this is something really different than the spiritual experiment of seeing an artwork. So we have to, definitely, we have to give content, we have to offer whatever technology can offer, which is different from a virtual tour, I would say.
Okay.
And then just a sentence, painting cannot escape from its original propensity to offer material for its owner immediate pleasure, and the idea of oil painting being related to publicity, to flatter the spectator buyer, to help build his prestige. I think that when we do this, we are also facing this idea of burger, that the artworks are here to flatter your eyes. And I believe during the COVID period, all the gallerists were asked to give condition reports to all the potential buyers. So there were like a huge amount of condition reports, because basically even for the one who wants to buy artworks, they have no clue what they're buying when they see it online.
And Sam, you had one more. Yeah.
Yeah, just a very short line. I think the key word here is seeing. And what do we mean by seeing? For me, seeing is not only an act that involves the eyes. When I encounter art, I see it with my entire body. I don't see it with my eyes only. I see it even when my back is to it. I feel it through the skin. I mean, it's maybe a little bit poetic or romanticizing the experience, but I genuinely believe that the impact of the physical impact of a work and how it relates to its space and how it dialogues with other works, because it's not only about seeing an artwork in isolation. There's something about the dialogue and the storytelling aspect of experiencing different artworks in a very specific context on a sunny day or on a rainy day when it's cold or not. You've just eaten something, you're running through because you're stressed and you have to, and then something stops you in your shoes. I think art is, we see it through our entire body. And this is something which I don't think you could experience in an online format.
And I think you can say that about the arts in general, dance and music, and but there's, and the spoken word and so on. This is, yeah. And it's, I think right now we're also, I find that I'm desperately grasping onto sort of some sense of physical truth or something, when my whole day is on this screen, you're looking at me, this is me all day long. So I'm gonna now move over to questions for the audience. We've completed the hour. If you want to stay for questions and answers, we'll do a round of those. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A, and we're not going to be able to get to everybody, but we're going to do our best. Okay, so one was, do you feel that curators will conceptualize exhibitions differently with the thought that people may be forced to view it virtually? Are you doing this differently now? I know I am, actually.
I think it's a very good question, actually. And I think it's one that is probably not a quick one to answer, because I think, first of all, we'll have to see what the next months and years bring. But I also think that it is probably at the base of everything that we do and how we plan for exhibitions at the moment. And I think, if anything, it prompted us, or I think it will prompt everyone, to rethink who their audience is, because as we were saying before, it is not just a question of the museum being open or closed. It is also the question of who is your audience in terms of people that will not come to see the exhibition physically, even if the exhibition is open. So in that sense, it is a question of maybe rethinking what kind of content you generate and how you generate content. I don't think it's the question of now, these simplistic things, I'm going to do a 3D camera thing, walk around the show and film it, and boom, it's online. It is really much deeper than that. And it is certainly something that we have been thinking always about, how do you engage with audiences? And the situation, I think, is prompting everyone to rethink also the non-physical aspect of engaging with audiences. So whether it is online or through email or different publications or whatever, I think that is definitely a core question.
Anybody else? Okay.
No, I would like to say the same. We have to do post-production in advance for whatever exhibition we produce. So we have to think of what is going to be post-produced for communication. So this is an exercise questions we raise for every exhibition. And just like Sam and Till said, we might have new questions, more and more questions to raise.
Next is looking forward to this event, especially virtual existence. This is from one of the registration questions. Virtual existence, whether socially, the arts, one's work, even virtual travel tourist destinations may come into existence in the upcoming years. What Walt Disney envisioned many years ago with the Disney World and Epcot Center, I think he's sort of thinking about tourism and the sort of virtual tourism that's happening now. I think we've covered this subject, but is there anything else that pops into your mind on this topic? In the UAE, I will say that many of my colleagues heading at arts institutions here have started to talk about reconceptualizing our program specifically with the question of our local audiences, knowing that tourism is not going to be a primary driving force. We have to think, what does it mean to really localize your program? And we always think of ourselves as both global and local, but this question becomes much more dramatic, even as the events that we do online are far more international than I would ever be able to do otherwise. It's this very odd hybrid. Okay. This is a there's a funny one about that. I'm not sure it's serious. Will there be any mention of the incredible research science has done trying to develop autonomous vehicles, replacing the driver at this point way in the future? Neuroscientists are calling the human vision supersight. This certainly is worth examining by the art community in the creation, displaying, and viewing of works of art. This is news to me. Supersight. Has anyone heard of supersight?
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly, but I think there is something to be said about, you know, the sort of, you know, when you talk about your gut feeling, or when you read between the lines, you know, I think there are so many different iterations and so many different sayings and awareness that we have for those things that are actually maybe not visible to us, but we kind of feel them somehow. You know, we have this, you know, hunch about something, or all those kind of things. And there's probably a lot more to us, to our viewing and our seeing than we're able to detect in science. And I strongly believe that there's much more to it. And this is exactly why I think there is a physical element to the art that you cannot reproduce in a digitized form. You know, that is exactly, I think, maybe the cutoff point, that is not in a binary kind of form of expressing things like you do in a computer or a digital image. I think there's exactly this non-binary, this sort of in between, that we probably should pay more attention to many more times. And it's, I think, exactly the language of art and the power of art, that it expresses those things that we cannot say in words and that we cannot express in a binary way. And this goes back to the core thing, that there is maybe a binary expression for art, but art really, by its true nature, is not really binary. It is really that in-between stage.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, there is actually an experiment underway that perhaps we will all look at and see what it yields. So the 10th edition of the Bucharest Biennale is actually, and this is not a joke, is actually going to be curated by a robot. So a robot called Jarvis has been appointed. Jarvis, Iron Man's Al Butler, if you're into comics, is going to be curating the 10th edition of the Bucharest Biennale. And it will be doing like deep mining through zillions of databases of artworks and artists. So if you're not online, you definitely won't make it into the exhibition. And then it will select things based on a certain algorithm. I haven't understood the whole thing. I want to read more about it. But that's, you know, that's going to be very interesting to see, and kind of like, yeah, I wonder how Jarvis will install the exhibition, but.
I'm so glad that this question was asked. Whoever asked that question, thank you. I had no idea that the Bucharest Biennial was being curated by Jarvis. One of my favorite characters, honestly.
Same here.
I think we have time for one more question, unless Louma, you want to jump in on.
No, I'm very surprised about this robo curator. I thought the curator job was protected from becoming replaced by robots.
I know. I thought I had a future-proofed career, but apparently not.
First, artists started taking our job, and now robots are taking our job. I'm going to become an artist now, just to kind of.
I think that's the last. I think the questions that remain have actually now been answered by us as we were going through. And I think that's going to be a chance to wrap it up. Any last sort of thoughts or hopes for what will be, when you can travel? I understand, Sam, until you guys have a big project coming up next year. Is that right?
Well, it also got postponed to 2022 as the finale in Lyon. So it also is now 2 years. And for all those reasons that we just discussed, we felt it was important to have that extra year because simply, you can't travel. You can't invite artists to create pieces at the moment in the city. So I think 2 years is a much safer time frame than just 1 year to the opening.
And also to allow ourselves the distance of time, because we didn't feel like responding now to whatever we are talking about today. In a sense, you feel like you're still in the middle of a battle, and there are priorities that super kind of exceed, what art in a sense can do when people are actually losing jobs, suffering from the disease and other complications. So we felt it was important to take the time to listen, to engage in conversations, and perhaps respond with that kind of with that distance that time allows you to be able not to be overwhelmed by the scale of what you're experiencing now, but perhaps, give it time to mature and
But I think, in general, like as a hope you were asking, then I want to show one final fun image. I think as a hope, I do hope that people become more reflective, understand the value in human relations and the respect and the things that you can and cannot replace, but also I think the respect for resources in general. We've been so much taught and living in a system that is entirely based on growth. We want more, we want better lives, we want more money, we want more careers, and our appetite is almost insatiable. And I think it is not only eating the planet and our living sources, but it's also eating up each other by wars and oppressive societies and all this. And maybe this sort of forces us to step back and breathe and understand that it is also okay to give up a little bit. If our economy shrinks by 20-30%, then surely there's a lot of hardship and we must absolutely help those in need. But as a society, maybe it is also okay. And those people that are not severely affected by it simply, accept the fact that maybe you just have 20-30% less and you're still fine and life still will carry on. But I wanted to show you a quick email and a quick picture into the camera by Marco Schienwald, who we were talking about in the beginning. This is a painting that he created actually in response to COVID right now. So he did get another one of those paintings, and you can see this woman here wearing a mask, which is, I think, very timely. And that piece is on view at an exhibition in Bregenz in Austria at the moment. So I think it's also quite fun sometimes to see what do artists do immediately. And it ties back to our exhibition as well.
It's been such a pleasure to see you guys again. And thank you, Louma, and everybody for sort of being willing to go on this kind of crazy journey on Zoom webinar format. And I want to give a special shout out to Sebastian Grube and Sonali Shirodkar for doing all the event production around this. And of course, the broader gallery team, everybody has been a factor. And I just thank you all for your work to make it possible for us to come together. So
thank you, Maya. Thank you, Louma.
Thank you so much.
It's been a true pleasure. And thank you for all those who tuned in and listened to us talking.
And I hope we can see each other again soon. And
I can't wait, honestly. See you soon.
There's no virtual hugs, so unfortunately.
All right. I know, now I feel like we should all go out to dinner and continue the conversation, but here we go. Okay, on the count of 3. Good night to all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.